Yes, welcome into the camp. Zach Heilprin, Jesse Temple. You can see it on their screen if you're watching on YouTube. Check us out. Ton of content coming from Big Ten Media Days here in Indianapolis over the next few days. Got a couple of videos up there already with Coach Luke Fickell joining me earlier today, and then also Athletic Director Chris McIntosh. We, however, just got done with about 20 minutes with Luke Fickell. We had a chance to just get into the little nitty-gritty stuff, and really good stuff from Luke Fickell that I'm sure Jesse's going to be writing about here very shortly. But when you look at some of the things that he said, I think I'm going to say there's tons of interesting stuff. A couple of newsy items, I would say. Leighton Nelson, the transfer from Vanderbilt, got hurt last week and suffered an injury that Luke Fickell believes is going to likely keep him out for the entire season. So that's a big hit. He was expected to fill in interior depth-wise, a spot which they obviously needed after losing some guys to the transfer portal. So Leighton Nelson hurt, and we don't know the exact injury, but it sounds like something that's going to keep him out for the entire year. Also, Max Steinecker, who I think anybody who probably is watching this knows who he is. He's obviously Wisconsin's director of player personnel, but is going to be stepping into a much bigger role, different role here coming up here in just a little bit. So he is going to become Wisconsin's GM, their general manager. And while the details of exactly what that's going to look like, I think are still kind of up in the air, it is certainly something that is probably needed at this time, Jesse. So first, Leighton Nelson news. A little bit of a hit.
Less than ideal considering they went to the portal to add depth. You still feel pretty good about your top line group on the offensive line. They were the five that handled basically every snap throughout the spring, and then JP Benchwell was your number 6 guy. But AJ Blazek obviously coached Leighton Nelson at Vanderbilt, was very familiar with him, brought him here to be a key piece this season, and it appears that's not going to be the case. So if they do have to go down the depth chart a little bit, they're going to have to figure it out from within. And I think that's in part why this fall camp is so important. We got a taste of it in spring ball with guys like Kevin Haywood getting reps, but they've got to get some more people ready because you just never know. They've been fortunate. They were fortunate last year that there weren't significant injuries on the offensive line, but it's not that way every season.
It's definitely not. Prior to last year, they had not been able to start the same starting five for more than 5 or 6 games the previous few years. I mean, the 2022 season was an absolute disaster in terms of having to start. How many different lineups along the offensive line did they go through during that period of time? It was a lot. So yeah, that is less than ideal. And it potentially means that maybe one of those younger guys, whether it's Emerson Mandel or Colin Cubberly, who came in obviously early, but was playing a whole bunch of different spots, maybe they have to fill in the depth, or maybe it's a name that we're not even talking about right now either. But, they have JP Benchwell as essentially your swing guard at whether he can go right or left. But beyond that, it's young. It's young. Yeah. I'm going to say that. The other newsy item I mentioned, obviously, Max Steinecker going from his role as the director of player personnel to general manager and all that's going to entail, which is still to be decided because of what college football has become, or what I should say college athletics has become. You just don't know what's going to be what from one day to the next.
Yeah, one of the things Luke talked about in our session with him is he doesn't care how old you are. If you show your dedication and you can help this program, he's going to trust you. And obviously they've got familiarity, just like Pat Lambert and Luke Fickell do. All of them were together at Cincinnati. They did some very special things from a recruiting standpoint with the Bearcats and have gotten off to a great start at Wisconsin. But this continues to evolve every year, and it was very clear that they needed to do something differently just because you have to manage finances now. There's NIL deals. You've got the house settlement situation where there's millions of dollars available for the school to directly be able to pay players, and someone's got to figure out how you put all of that together. So Max, certainly based on the interactions we've had and what we've seen in the last year and a half or so, seems like the perfect candidate to step into that role. But when you do that, you've got to figure out how to put the rest of the pieces of this puzzle together, and that continues to happen. I suppose the good news, if you are a Badgers fan, is that Luke Fickell clearly has put a lot of thought and emphasis on building out a recruiting staff and doing the things that are necessary that go even beyond that to make sure they have the best possible roster for the future.
Right. And what one of these things it does do is kind of take Max out of the day-to-day recruiting aspect of it. Pat Lambert's still going to be in charge of it, that aspect of it, and he has been just as big of a part of what they've done here as Max these last 2 years, or close to 2 years, I guess. 2 years in November. He's been a huge part of it as well. So it's not like it's just going to be like a whole bunch of new people, but it is. They're going to fill that out into a bigger department, and then you're also going to have this other aspect of it where it's maybe a little bit more business. And Max that's something he's going to have to learn. It's not something that is probably he's familiar with, because the position didn't exist for college until recently. And I know there's some other schools that have gone that GM in recent years, but this is also different than an NFL GM too, right? Like, this is not just a guy who's going to oversee everything. Luke Fickell's still going to have the final say on stuff, but when it comes to managing a roster and managing the money that goes along with it, Max is going to play a big role with that. And they're also going to obviously have to hire, for lack of a better term, a capologist, kind of like a Russ Ball for the Packers, for people that follow that. He's the one that does the whole budget and decides what they can do and the ways that they can work around stuff. And they're going to have to do that because that's just the way it is right now.
Yeah, it continues to evolve, and Wisconsin has evolved with this process. And I do think also that we just don't know exactly what this looks like from a money standpoint, but I can't overemphasize the importance of that settlement money. And obviously other programs are going to be able to take advantage of that, but now that schools can directly pay players and you have this infusion of money and don't have to necessarily just rely on collectives, I think it helps a program like Wisconsin immensely. But next year we may be talking about something totally different.
We're going to be talking about something.
This is how it goes.
That's just the way it is. It's from court case to court case, day to day. It changes, and that's just the way that obviously the way things go with college athletics. So some other takeaways from Big Ten Media Day. I don't think this is any kind of a surprise, but obviously Luke Fickell was asked about the quarterback battle. It's a thing that we've talked about since the spring. Obviously Tyler Van Dyke took a jump at the end of spring. It felt like he had stepped ahead, but this is competition that's going to play out the first couple of weeks of camp, and they're never going to actually announce who the starting quarterback is, because who does that anymore? But anybody who's at practice will understand who's it going to be. And I know a lot of people have been like, that means, Tyler Van Dyke hasn't played well. But as we've discussed a number of times, it has a lot to do with the fact that Braden Locke has made steps from last year. This is not the same competition that was last year, where it was Tanner Mordecai coming in and just being that dude. It's not the same thing anymore.
No, it's not. And we mentioned this back in the spring, but I thought Van Dyke took a significant jump during the second half of the spring, had a really outstanding scrimmage day, and felt like if you had to name a starter, you were going to go with him. But it has helped to elevate the competition. And Luke even said as well, like, they hope they're able to find someone sooner rather than later. But if that's not the case, if Braden Locke should have an outstanding fall camp and Tyler Van Dyke should, I believe Luke mentioned the word flatline. Let's just hypothetically say that does happen. Then you've got to reevaluate things. But this is not the worst thing in the world. I know some people might say, well, then you're taking away number one reps from your presumed starter. But I don't think it will be a problem, because by the time we get to 2 weeks out from the opener or thereabouts, they're going to know. And that's when you're really prepping for your opponent, because the first few weeks are learning about your own team. And I should also say, for people who are listening and watching, we are going to have an opportunity to give you a lot of insight this fall, because most of the fall camp practices the first 2-3 weeks are going to be open for us to be able to observe and give you the best possible insight we can offer.
Well, we'll try and do a good job with that.
It's our job.
We're going to make some efforts to make that happen. A couple of other notes from that get together we had with Luke Fickell. Asked about freshmen, asked about injuries. We got the Leighton Nelson injury, obviously, but it sounds like otherwise they're in pretty good shape injury-wise, in terms of having guys being able and ready to play when fall camp begins. That includes a guy like Taka Curtis, who has apparently really taken a jump since the spring, not just physically, but mentally and playing fast. And I know Luke Fickell can't wait to get the pads on, because that's what he's known for is when you put the pads on, he's going to take your head off. If you looked at any of his tape, that was certainly the case with him. The other injuries that kind of popped up towards the end of spring, Kamoi Latu with the shoulder, he's back. Aaron Witt also had that shoulder, he's back. So those are two big guys that they need to have depth-wise, especially on with Aaron Witt. They need more bodies at outside linebacker that are going to be able to play and play a lot, because that was not the case last year. And then the freshman, he didn't say it, but it feels like those freshman running backs are going to be given a chance. Darian Dupree, Dylan Jones. I mean, Gideon Atuka obviously had opportunities in the spring, but I don't think he's bringing them up if they don't, at least have a little bit of a chance to be players this fall for Wisconsin. And again, he's like, well, if Ches Malusi and Tyree Walker don't give up any room, then it is what it is. It's one spot you can play early.
Yes. And he even mentioned Jonathan Taylor, not saying in any way that the guys coming in are in the same breath as Taylor, because Taylor ran for, 1,977 yards, had an absolutely ridiculous freshman year. But in the point he was making is that, like you're talking about, Zach, at that position, a freshman can come in and contribute. I think the good news for Wisconsin is that they're in a spot where if one of those guys isn't ready, they should be okay, because I really like what we saw this spring from Ches Malusi and what Tawee Walker brought. We didn't know necessarily how it was going to fit, because he hadn't been in a significant role. I mean, he was a career backup at Oklahoma, but that's a pretty solid 1-2 combo. And yet, if Jones or Dupree should come in and prove they deserve an opportunity, they're going to get an opportunity. Like, Luke doesn't believe in just because you're a senior. And he talked about this with leadership too. Just because you're a senior, you have to be the guy. So I think it's going to be very good for the room. And I'm interested to see that position as much as any position, just because how often do they bring in 3 running backs in one class and 2 that are that talented that it feels like, man, they bring a skill set that could be very dynamic to this offense.
And it's a much different looking group than last year, obviously, right? I mean, I saw a picture this offseason of them out at lunch, or I think it was out at dinner, and there was like 10 of them. And last year there was like 4 of them. And we heard Luke Fickell, he was being pretty reflective in how things played out last year. And I'm sure that's something, and I know you had talked to him about that this offseason already. But it felt like he went even more on it, being reflective of what went wrong last year and why he didn't see it coming, or not even maybe why he didn't see it coming, but that he didn't see it coming. And that it was one of the first times in his career where he, was telling some people like, yeah, I think we're going to be pretty good, or at least intimating that they were going to be pretty good. And very quickly he found out that they had some holes that he didn't actually see. But the other freshman that was mentioned, Dylan Johnson, the defensive lineman, the wrestler. Of course, Fickell's going to mention a wrestler, but because of the bodies there and the let's be fair about it, the lack of experience behind James Thompson Jr. and Kurt Neal and Ben Barton, there's really not much behind in terms of experience at Wisconsin. Now, there's some guys that have played other places, but I think a guy like Dylan Jones is one of those ones that could potentially help. He said give him like 10 to 15 snaps per game.
Yeah, Dylan Johnson to me is another one of those players to watch, just because he's got big-time play potential, playmaking. They don't have a lot of those guys who could just blow something up on the defensive line. And I did a story on him this summer. I mean, obviously Wisconsin was fortunate just because of the circumstances. Initially committed to Northwestern, and now he's signed with the Badgers. But it's not impossible. We talk about this at running back. I would say it's less likely on the defensive line, but to me, Keanu Benton is a perfect example of someone who came in and established himself, even though we didn't think, based on the first fall camp practice, it was going to happen. So it's a possibility, and that's good. I don't think, as long as Wisconsin continues to sign 20 to 22 guys and go the portal route, Luke wants to develop his players. So I wouldn't expect very many true freshmen to be key contributors in a given year. But how many seasons have we seen play out where there was at least a couple and they became starters right away and NFL players? So it's possible. Just we got to wait and see.
It is. So when I had a chance to talk with him earlier today for the camp, which again you can find the interview on our YouTube page. Going to be including it in this episode for people that are listening for the podcast. But I asked about the quarterback, and then I was like, the other position that people aren't talking about, and he's like defensive line. Yes, I mean that is to me that is as key of a position as they have on this team right now in terms of being able to stand up and be better than they were last year, because they got the ball run down their throat last year, and that's not Wisconsin football. Jake Chaney said as much today. That's not who they were. That's not who they are. That's not. And if they want to get into those really crazy rush packages that we've talked about, the one with the one defensive lineman, you got Jaheim Thomas coming off the edge, you got all these different things happening. If you can't stop the run, it doesn't matter. And that's what Tressel said in the spring too.
Yeah, I mean, they had back-to-back games where they gave up 200 yards. It's so uncharacteristic of Wisconsin. And
take away the sacks, they gave up 200 yards 5 times.
It's remarkable. But I think there were a lot of factors that led to that very clearly. We've addressed it ad nauseum. The personnel just didn't match what they wanted to do. The linebackers didn't have the speed. And
here's the thing, though, Jesse. What did they do to that room?
Well, that's what I was going to say, is they totally overhauled it. And when I was talking to Hunter Wohler today, he felt like the single biggest difference that everybody listening and watching will see is the team speed defensively. And if you're a fan, you have to hope that's how it plays out. But certainly we saw in the spring at outside linebacker, they were giving the offensive line trouble at times. They've got a lot more depth. And Luke gave a really interesting example, and it's something that the staff has talked about before, but like CJ Getz last season, he was forced to play 70 plays a game. And he said CJ was 248 pounds at the start of the season, and it got to the point where late in the year, CJ was 224 pounds because he was playing so much, he was wearing down, and they did not have a choice. And Luke said he's not one to have a guy not practice, but he had to have serious conversations about should he be out there right now because we're going to need him to play. And he also said that he didn't think it was fair to guys like CJ or Hunter Wohler to throw a backup in there for 2 or 3 snaps when it wasn't going to be at the level that was necessary, or even have guys who cared as much or was passionate as much.
That was the thing. That's
really interesting stuff from Luke in that session. And so there were a number of factors why this team wasn't good enough. The offense wasn't good enough, but since we're having this conversation specifically about the defense, why the defense wasn't good enough, but the depth wasn't where it needed to be. Obviously the personnel and the speed, so many on the field factors. And I expect it to be different this season, but we're not, carrying the hype train in the way that we did last year or the staff did as well. It's tamped down significantly because now it's just about on-field results. So it has been a fascinating year to watch this program. And, Luke is willing to be honest about the shortcomings. And I think that's something that's worth acknowledging too.
Yeah, again, he said a number of times, and I think that's his. And again, you had an opportunity to chat with him one-on-one last off
in the spring,
March, where he was pretty open about it. But I thought he was even more open about it today, about how he was even telling his wife, like, I thought we were going to be good. I thought we were going to be, and was it our talent was here and our play was here, right? Like that he thought that the talent was up at a level and how they played was down here. And as a coach, he wants it to be the other way around, when the talent is here and it lifts it up to a different level. And they didn't do that. Yeah.
I think he was asked, isn't that the hardest thing as a coach? And he said, absolutely. And that's the thing that kind of keeps you up at night. And I also think that's why every year you're going to go into the season thinking that you're excited and optimistic, but he feels like there's been a substantial change in this program. And one of the things that he talked about when I spoke with him in the spring was that he said leadership and alignment. Leadership from a player standpoint, alignment from a coaching standpoint. We obviously saw there were significant changes on the coaching staff with a group now that Luke feels is perhaps better aligned with the vision. But leadership is one of the first things Luke mentioned when he went to the podium earlier today, that it just seems like it's different this year from that group. And maybe this is all just lip service, right? It's still July. We haven't seen a single fall camp practice, certainly haven't seen any games. But he's got a better sense, at least he feels like he has a better sense of what this team is all about. Because, he went into last year thinking he knew about this program, and he just didn't, because there was no way to know until you got into the grind of the season, and it didn't meet what he thought it was going to be.
I feel like some buzzwords have been vibe and aura. I'm not going to pretend to think to define what aura is, but vibing and the vibe around the team it does feel different. And Jack Nelson said that certainly about the offensive line room, in large part because of AJ Blazik, because just how different he is. But it does feel like there's a little bit different vibe, and whether that actually, leads to anything is anybody's guess at this. I mean, at this point. But were there any other takeaways that you had from that stood out for you? I had one on the tip of my tongue, so hopefully you have something so I can think about it real quickly here.
From our session with Luke?
Yeah.
That's the vast majority of it. Yeah, that's what I can think of right now.
Thanks, Jesse. Thanks for really doing
That's
a good
why
job.
I'm here, guys.
Really, really good job drawing that out. Oh, I know what it was. So in the spring, I was shocked by the amount of hitting that they did. Shocked at how often they were taking guys to the ground. And it wasn't just backups, it was starters getting taken to the ground. And we saw people get upset. Saw people get pissed, and start throwing the ball at each other. And it was bad. And I was like, maybe this is just a spring thing. It's not just a spring thing. They are going to do it in fall camp, and they're going to go live towards the end of every practice. Well, I shouldn't say every practice. It felt like, until they decide that they're not going to, they are going to go full speed at the end of practice. And that's just unheard of certainly at Wisconsin, but I have to imagine in most places. What do you think that says?
This is a result of what happened last year, where he felt like when he was reflecting on the season that they didn't do enough from that standpoint, live speed. So he and the staff had a firm understanding of what this team was going to be all about. Because and again, go back to the conversation I had with him in the spring, like they got into this season and it wasn't until the Purdue game, and we're talking about Big Ten play, where they really started to feel like, oh, this is what we can and what we can't do. I mean, it's your job as a staff to know that going into the season. And one of the ways you can have that idea is by watching more live speed football. And certainly this is football. You run the risk when you do that of having injuries.
Yeah.
But what's the alternative? Well, you don't do it and you don't have as good of a sense about your team. And right now, Luke wants to go into this season feeling like he knows who he can trust. He knows what the scheme's going to look like, and he knows what to expect every game. And inconsistency's kind of been you want to talk about buzzwords, like 5 years of inconsistency for Wisconsin football, and that's why it hasn't matched what the expectations used to be. And so they've got to figure out how to get that back, and he feels like one way to do that is to go more physical, full-speed football. So it'll be entertaining.
I mean, can you ask for anything better than that? Like, we're going to see some not heat-seeking missiles, though. We're not. That is not what we're going to see. We're not going. That vernacular is gone. We're not going to use those terms this year, but we're going to see some big hits. I'm just the first. Yeah, again, this is what it has to be. After what happened last year, it just has to be this way. And you hope, if you're Luke Fickell, and you hope if you're the rest of the staff, that it's just something that works out and you don't have the big injuries that pop up. But we'll see. Again, Wisconsin will be in fall camp July 30th down in Platteville. They're going to be there for 13 days. They do have that open practice on August 10th that fans can go to. You do have to pay $5 if you're 12 and over. It's free for anybody under the age of 12. But we are going to have a chance to see a majority of these practices, not just in Platteville, but when they come back to Madison, likely as we get closer to that August 30th date. We're gonna think we know a lot about this team. We're gonna think we know a lot about this team by
we're gonna talk about it like we do know everything about this team, and then in October, if we're wrong, maybe we'll say we were wrong. I don't know. Do we hold ourselves accountable?
We held ourselves accountable last year.
We did.
I don't know if I've killed myself more. Not killed, but like talk crap about myself more in the last year than ever before. Like this last year has been just me talking crap about myself, about how bad and how wrong I was about this team last year. But you know who else was wrong about the team?
Who?
Luke Fickell.
Yes.
So I wasn't the only one, and so were you.
I was.
And so was everybody else that covered the freaking team. Accurate?
Accurate.
All right. So what do you got planned? What do you got planned for the Athletic?
Well, you want me to give away the milk for free, Zach?
I'm not telling you what. I'm not telling you. I'm not asking you to say, "Oh, this is what I'm going to write." I'm going to say, "What's the idea? What's the angle that people can tune in for later tonight?"
I I haven't decided. How about that?
Oh.
There's multiple stories in the works. I promise there will be wall-to-wall Wisconsin coverage. I'm honestly still trying to figure out the order in which those stories will go.
What a salesman. What a salesman is
So
Jesse
subscribe right now. I'm sure we have a great deal.
Subscribe. You have no idea what you're going to get from Jesse Temple at any point, but it's going to be
That's
good.
the fun of it.
It's going to be good. I promise that. So, again, we'll have a lot more content coming from Big Ten Media Days as it's an 18-team conference now. It was kind of a slow day, I thought, today. It was a little bit down day. Should pick up tomorrow as some of the newer schools arrive. So, Jesse, thank you very much.
Thanks, Zach.